content of all episodes of this podcast channel has been created by a senior mental health practitioner and researcher who is a high-functioning autistic person and survivor of complex trauma with several years of practical experience with lived experiences of neurodiversity. This episode is the sequel to the previous episode about high-functioning autism and complex trauma. In the previous episode we talked about the experiences of complex trauma for high-functioning autistic people. We discussed that these individuals could suffer from invisible disabilities that are not obvious for neurotypical society and therefore can be easily ignored and neglected. This episode is about some practical recommendations to increase awareness and support for high-functioning autistic people in various social environments. Maybe the first and most important point to consider is that high-functioning autism is still a disability, although it is invisible in many aspects. Although their performance can seem normal in education or work, they are highly vulnerable to burnout, traumatization, and bullying. They usually sense emotional cues in their social environment in a much stronger way than neurotypical people. They can be easily traumatized by a stressful social situation which may not significantly impact a neurotypical person. Most of the time the impact of stressful social situations on high-functioning autistic individuals is underestimated. It is very common that their experiences of traumatization may not be validated by other people in their social environment. As we explained in the previous episode, the threshold of traumatization for autistic individuals is considerably lower than neurotypical people, and this does not have anything to do with lack of skills or not being intelligent. This is just due to differences in neurological sensitivity. So it is important to be mindful that even those autistic people who are highly intelligent and know a lot of social skills are still very vulnerable to become traumatized in many social situations. As a teacher, manager, supervisor, or classmate or coworker, we can have a real impact on mental health of high-functioning autistic people who are studying or working with us. Here are a few simple steps that you can take into consideration and make a real change in the life of an autistic person in your social environment. How can you help if you are a teacher or employer of a high-functioning autistic person? Many of disabilities and difficulties of autistic people in educational or professional settings not only can be prevented but also can be turned into strengths. It is important to remember that almost all settings and standards in typical work or educational places have been designed by neurotypical people, and they are mostly insensitive to unique needs and characteristics of neurodiverse students or employees. This inconsistency can make even a skillful and intelligent autistic person to have repetitive experiences of failure in various professional, educational, and social environments. However, with a more flexible and mindful approach in designing the settings of educational and professional environments, many autistic individuals can be capable of distinct and creative performance. Therefore, if you are a teacher or supervisor of an autistic person, the first and most important point to consider is to evaluate how much your current educational or work settings are consistent with the brain function of an autistic person and how you can make some adjustments to reduce this inconsistency. Here are a few simple points that can make a huge impact on improving the health and performance of your autistic student or employee. Provide autistic individuals with some private space in educational or workplace when they are doing individual tasks. Allow them to have short and private breaks during a working day, and consider that in stressful days, they may need more frequent break times than a neurotypical peer. Allow them to study or work from home occasionally when it is possible. Unlike neurotypical people, many autistic individuals appreciate working from home as it helps them with grounding and reducing brain loads by working in a safer place with less stimuli. Give them clear and written structures. Many autistic people can follow better educational and professional instructions when they are presented in written or recorded format. Allow them to communicate in written language such as email instead of a phone call or verbal conversation. It is especially a really helpful strategy when they need to talk about challenging or stressful matters. Now we are going to discuss how you can help a friend or family or community member who is living with high-functioning autism. First of all, Try to understand and accept the fact that autistic people have unique ways of social interaction and relationships, and this should not be considered as lack of social skills or deficits. Social isolation and exclusion are very common amongst high-functioning autistic people who have a complex trauma history. Although they usually need a considerable amount of solitary time, it does not mean that they don't need social relationships. However, they usually end up in social isolation because they usually cannot be accepted by the neurotypical society if they use their own unique social interaction styles without masking all the time. For example, many typical ways of verbal communication and body language are not compatible with the brain functions of an autistic person. A high-functioning autistic person can try to learn these neurotypical ways and imitate them in social situation, but it is usually associated with a high level of brain overloads and burnout experiences in the long term. And finally, despite all these efforts to act and seem like a neurotypical person, high-functioning autistic people still can get a lot of rejective reactions and judgments of being weird or not being socially skillful. If you are a family or community member who wants to help an autistic person with social engagement, you first need to know their unique social interaction styles. Although there are differences between one autistic person to another, there are some common interaction styles amongst many high-functioning autistic people. We finish this episode with providing 3 typical examples of autistic styles of social interaction, and we will discuss it more specifically through future episodes. Here are some common examples of social interaction styles and preferences amongst high-functioning autistic people. First and maybe most common example is that they usually don't enjoy superficial conversations, but they are extremely passionate about deep discussions. They usually have very special interests and tend to talk about them at least for a few minutes without changing the topic. They like focused and continuous chats focusing on one certain topic instead of multiple short chats and changing topics. Their lack of eye contact in some situations can help their brain to process the social situation in a better way. Continuous eye contact for autistic people can be associated with interruptions in their optimum psychological functions. They may look rigid or reluctant in their body language, but please consider that the body language of autistic people is not representative of their emotional feelings about other people. In general, the typical interpretations about signs of body language usually does not apply to autistic people. Finally, be mindful that gender diversity is very common amongst autistic people, but its appearance can be very different and much less obvious compared to neurotypical gender diverse people. However, being less visible does not justify to be invalidated. These 2 episodes were an introduction to some common challenges of high-functioning autistic people. In the next few episodes, we change the topic and will start to talk about dissociative identity disorder and borderline personality disorder. We will have more episodes about autism and complex PTSD in future as well. If you are a person with lived experiences, we appreciate if you share your relevant experiences or ideas in the comments section.